Haswell that I've had over the last decade. So anyway, watch out. I'm only looking at Durham now.
Good morning, Senator Natalie Murdoch, in Senate District 20. So after redistricting, lost downtown this area. So now I have South Durham, all the South Point Mall area, all the way down to the Chatham County line. So picked up an entire county, Chatham County, which has been awesome. They have been so welcoming and amazing. So looking forward to today's discussion. Oh, and entering term 2.5.
This is Marsha Morey, entering 3.5. Durham District 30, great to be here and really appreciate it.
Good morning. I'm Natalie Byer. I'm a member of the school board and have been this is my 13th year, lucky 13, and so appreciative of you all and your leadership and representation for us in Raleigh. Thanks so much.
Good morning. I'm Millicent Rogers. I represent Consolidated District B. I am a parent advocate and bring equity lens to the work that we do when we advocate here as a single parent and working class parent. And I look forward to this conversation. Thanks for being here.
Last but not least, Zach Hawkins, House District 31. This is term 3. I represent about a little bit of downtown after redistricting, a little less than of downtown, all of East Durham, the best part of Durham County, and the RTP. That includes North Carolina Central University, Durham Tech, and it includes, let me make sure I got that right. That's it. That's all I need to worry about. And then I'm a three-time DPS dad and a former teacher. So glad to be here.
Thank you all for those introductions. It's good to have everyone together. And as we kick off 2023, we know your legislative session is starting soon. And so Durham, the school board put together a draft legislative agenda that we're going to talk a little bit about. I want to make sure that the school board has the time to share our agenda and speak on some of the issues that we are concerned about, but also Durham delegation want you all to have an opportunity to share your priorities going into your session and what so we can be seeing where your focus will be and also where our priorities might align. And then we'll leave some time at the end if there's any other discussion that we want to add. I think this is, again, a draft agenda. Our first school board meeting for the year is actually next week. So we'll be looking at this and voting on it next week. But it's really focused on some of the challenges that we are seeing in public schools right now. Public schools and Durham public schools are still rebuilding from the pandemic. We know that our students and the impact of that time being at home, which was necessary for public health, is still impacting our students as they're coming into school every day. And the way that our economy has shifted is impacting the students' families, as well as our adults and the educators who work for our school system. So when I think about some of the challenges that we have faced this year and continue to face, I think about the lack of bus drivers that are able to get our students to school safely. And we know that that's an issue that Durham is not only having, but other school districts are having across the state. And wonder about those classified staff members who just now with the state have gotten to $15 an hour. How can we increase that pay so we can keep really great folks in our school buildings? Another challenge that we have seen this year is our students really struggling with some mental health challenges. We see that's not just a Durham issue, but an issue again across the state. How can the state and the legislator help support us as we're supporting our students? We know that we need really great staff in our buildings. Durham has been lucky that we have really great educators who still want to come and work here, but we need really more. We need people who are coming out of college, who are excited about committing to education, and they need some great benefits. I got an email from an instructional assistant the other day who said, why do I not have retirement after I retire? Or excuse me, why do I not have a health plan after I retire? And that's a state policy that we all know it was implemented this year. So we really want to think about how do we keep great educators in our classrooms? That's compensation and a whole host of other ways to do that. And I think the other big challenge that we've been just thinking about is as we're bringing these new people into the fold, what does it mean to look at achievement? As we know that, again, this time that we were away and the way that schools are graded, does that work, right? And we know that the state Board of Education has been looking at different ways to measure achievement. I think we also have ideas and ways to think about doing that. So those are some of the challenges that we're kind of facing as a school district, and this agenda is pretty addresses many of those challenges. So I'll give us a minute to look at what we have here. I'll just read the top headers: fully fund Leandro, increase compensation, which I talked a little bit about, increase school safety funding. And we think about that really as supporting the students and the mental health of students. Focus on equity, healthy school meals for all, and investing in mental health support. So again, this is our draft that we brought. I know that we had Millicent, Natalie, and Javanya worked a little bit on this draft. Do you all want to speak any more to what we put together?
Yeah, I think that's a great introduction to where we are, Chair Umstead. I want to make sure that you all know that we shared the North Carolina School Boards Association legislative agenda with you all that has some further detail. I will say on the school safety issue, our representatives, Ms. Lewis, Ms. Rogers, and Ms. Valladares, and we're working with Orange on the school safety issue. We are not necessarily in agreement with the need for police officers in every school in Durham, and don't want funding that gets passed of the General Assembly to be restricted to that as the only use of that funding. We weren't successful in getting that modified in that legislative agenda, but that is something that we all worked on the floor to try to modify in that document. Y'all that were there have other thoughts and anything else you want to add? I welcome colleagues to chime in.
I'd like to offer around the school safety issue and the North Carolina legislative agenda. There are districts in North Carolina that do not have adequate working relationships with local law enforcement. That is not the case here in Durham, and we're lucky. And I can see the value in having school safety funding provided for local districts on a state level, but giving local districts the authority to use that as necessary for school safety. We already have budget for SROs. We're already keeping our schools safe. We're already doing that work here in Durham. And so to be able to use that funding to supplement the work that is being done now would be helpful, and make sure that we're not restricting places like Durham and Guilford and Orange County that already have established these relationships. But hearing that there's districts that need that support in that way, to give them the flexibility to do that in their districts would be okay.
Other comments from school board members on kind of our draft agenda and what's been laid out here? Oh, surprisingly so. Oh, surprisingly so.
Chair Umstead, would it be helpful if Dr. Minka and staff could kind of share about vacancies? Like, I don't think we've ever seen EC vacancies, elementary school vacancies, bus driver, all through the organization, and perhaps for them to kind of give you some sense of how bad it is and how much that concerns us going forward.
All right, thank you, Ms. Byers. I have Dr. Lesan, who is our Assistant Superintendent for HR, can give us just a quick overview of vacancies that we have as of today. So we are struggling like any other district. We're doing everything possible to recruit. I just remember my conversation with ECU, NCCU, even NC State. They don't have enough candidates that they're producing that will be graduating in May. We are doing something even creative. We're going internationally to recruit. But even with that, we have about 91 international teachers in our district. That's not enough. So we're still struggling. So I think all the conversation we're going to have around compensation, funding public schools, I think that's going to help if there's going to be any movement in Raleigh. So without further ado, Dr. Lesan.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Vacancies are a challenge that districts are facing literally across the nation right now with just our hiring challenges. As far as specific numbers, I would want to dig a little bit just to see exactly what they are today, but we're consistently well over 150 vacancies. I mean, well over that on a running basis. What I would like to focus on when we're talking about vacancies is it's just not the vacancies themselves, it's where the vacancies are. When you have multiple vacancies within a particular school site and the impact that it has on instruction at that site. And I would also say it's the revolving door of positions. So as we are diligently hiring. I have information that I share with principals where I say, these are the numbers of new hires, these are numbers of vacancies. And what that information clearly shows is that we're hiring certain positions multiple times during the year. So imagine if you're even able to find a math teacher, but you have to hire that math position over and over again. So that's an additional thing to consider when we're looking at the working conditions, the benefits, the aspects of employment that will really not only attract, but retain folks in Durham Public Schools, and why we really need to focus on being as competitive in this market as we can.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Dr. Lassane, you said over 150 vacancies, and you said that some of them are concentrated, potentially with 80 or so being in EC. Is that correct?
I would have to pull the exact numbers, but it's probably a little even more than 80 in EC, specifically if you're figuring all positions, IAs, teachers, everything.
What are the basic sort of requirements for the lowest level position for EC?
So it would require a transcript. Anyone who comes in, we have to evaluate their transcript to see what they actually have. It depends on their coursework, their GPA, and all of that to make sure that we could actually get them in a program to obtain a license.
And follow up. The reason I asked that question is it really goes into incentivizing, right? Like if we know what, because I can imagine this is happening across all 115 districts across the state. But to hear it from you about what those positions are and what the details are of those positions, we could think about ways to incentivize in the General Assembly, because what has happened, I mean, at least propose, I'll use that as a better term, because over the last 2 cycles, we have done it for different types of teachers or different types of positions. And students who have intellectual and developmental disabilities clearly are most vulnerable and need the attention the most. So that just sort of stuck out to me otherwise, but I would love to see a breakdown both of your revolving positions as well as, sort of the 150 that you mentioned. Thank you.
I can put that together and I'll be glad to share that out.
Representative Austin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Lassane, could you just put that 150 vacancy number in perspective for me? What's in percentages, what does that mean in terms of your total workforce?
I would actually have to go in. I don't have those concrete numbers right in front of me because it is ever changing. But what I can tell you is our greatest areas are EC, math, science, as well as we have some outliers with like CTE areas, career and technical education areas and all of that. Those are our greatest needs. But I would also add to that, part of where the challenge comes is it used to be a time that we wouldn't have a problem finding elementary teachers, but we may have one school that may have 4 or 5 elementary vacancies. So even areas that we've actually been able to fill traditionally, we're having greater challenges having the number of candidates that we need because our programs in North Carolina are not producing enough. But I can get you some hardcore numbers.
If you would, and I guess for now or for later, the vacancy rate that we're experiencing here, I understand that we are dealing with high vacancies across the country, but is our vacancy rate comparable to kind of the percentage of vacancies that we're seeing across the state? And that you can answer that later if that's easier for you.
Our vacancy rate is comparable to like districts. So,
Yeah, also to piggyback from that, what was saying, Representative Austin, we have roughly around 2,400 certified employees. If you're looking at 150, which is our teachers and our teacher assistant. So just look at about 2,400 employees, certified employees that we have. That will give us an idea.
Madam Chair.
So I'd like to comment, Madam Chair, if you don't mind, as we stay talking about these vacancies. We all know that a few years ago, last year, when state representative, they decided to include about 150 million, to pay additional about 100 or 150 million dollars to other district. And we were one of the few that were excluded. Personally, I would like for you to fight back for DPS and other urban areas. Keep in mind, I used to travel across the state working with East North Carolina districts, and the cost of living here in RTP is different. If you're making about $43,000 to live here, RTP area compared to Craven County is different. So we would like for our representative to continue really fighting for us when it comes to whatever additional supplements the district is gonna get. We gotta keep this in mind. Now it's hard for folks to come to DPS because they can stay wherever they want to stay because of additional supplements they receive. I understand legislatures, the governor, they have to look at the whole state, but I would like for our local delegation to continue really voicing your voices as far as DPS is concerned. $43,000 to live in this area is not enough. And I will also say this, when we're looking at our vacancies, let's say math, it's really hard to attract folks in the RTP area to come teach math for $43,000 where you can go somewhere else, get $75,000 living college. So we got to keep all these things in perspective. Now we're having classes without math teachers. It's really hard. So compensation really matters. And I know we've been having this conversation about master's degree being compensated at that level. So that's the core of the problem. So we used to recruit in the past going up north, New York, other places to recruit folks, but they don't want to come because we're not paying master's degree. So some of those really easy solutions, but they depend on the political will from Raleigh. So we want you to continue really fighting for us.
Oh, just, Madam Chair, just quick follow-up to Dr. Mbenga's point. Thank you so much for highlighting that. And do want to add, particularly in the Senate, our minority leader, Senator Blue, because Wake County fell in the same predicament where they were not provided with that supplemental income. And he included it in his floor speech as to why he was voting against it. That was one of the reasons I voted against that budget. So I made similar comments and said, I cannot support a budget if you are not going to include urban areas, to your point, where cost of living is through the roof. Affordability practically doesn't exist. So definitely just wanted to highlight, we will continue to bring that up as we come in this session. And to state the obvious too, in the Senate, as you know, now, for the first time in some years, we're in the super minority, but that doesn't mean we're not going to fight back and still make those issues heard, because particularly all legislators in urban areas had that same frustration as to, you're not telling the full story when it's so much more expensive. So you can't simply provide a supplement to some counties and not others. It just wasn't equitable, let alone all of the tax dollars that Durham sends to the state as well.
Dr. Mbenga, question for you. And well, let me start by saying one of my sort of tenets from the last two sessions have been to lead the sort of EC efforts like IDD caucus that we've initiated, that we're hopeful to reinstate this session, as well as teacher diversity. And so I led the governor's teacher diversity legislative efforts. And a lot of this and what you're saying about master's degree is absolutely huge. And so it's been on the agenda. It actually got some movement last session, but ultimately did not make it in the budget. But we will continue to fight. The thing that I wanted to ask was about retired teachers. what's the local recruitment effort for retired teachers? Because I know that has come up in the General Assembly about how retired teachers can come back and be supportive. Now I was trying to look up what was about to look up what the last sort of conversations were about that, but that's another avenue for us to explore if if that's needed.
Right,
Our rehired retirees are angels. We have so many rehired retirees who are committed to Durham Public Schools, and they are in many cases what's holding a lot of things together. We even recently, for those retirees, a retiree can return after 6 months. Okay, and work in restricted capacity according to legislation. And so we actually have sent correspondence to all of our rehired retirees or retirees to ask them, would they consider coming in and working? We did a special blitz for EC, specifically looking at our retired EC teachers to see who would be willing to come in and fill in some of these cases. And so those are ongoing outreach efforts that we have. We also, one other provision that I would add is in the cases where we have because of the restricted capacity, we are also doing a lot more of pairing positions. So maybe if you have 2 half-time retirees to serve in a full-time position.
All right, let me piggyback from there. When it comes to East, it's a crisis. I remember attending a meeting with other superintendent. There are other districts, they're even putting $10,000 on the table, but they cannot find those EC teachers. It's really a crisis. So when it comes to those legislation with restrictions, I think if you guys are going to be aggressive enough, even looking at those restrictions, especially for those EC, if you remove those restrictions, those teachers will be willing to come back after staying home for probably a month and come back and get a full salary. They will be willing to come back. So that's an area that I will strongly advocate for you guys to be able to push, especially for EC.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And it came back to me. That was during the COVID session where we passed the 6-month piece for retired educators. Well, thank you for that. I don't know if we're going on to another topic or not. I'll sort of yield if there's not anything else.
Yeah, I would just a question not to be necessarily answered here, but I want to know what your Republican colleagues are saying, because we're in jeopardy of not being able to provide a sound basic education, which is, I know, their floor and often sometimes their ceiling as well. This crisis is going to snowball into so many lawsuits for not being able to provide the adequate services that are required by federal law that we're in trouble as a state, from the bus driver to the EC teacher. And what I tell our constituents here, and they have little patience for, is the best we're going to do is steal from some other district. And they say, well, dang it, that's your job. Okay, we can do that. But I feel for Person County and other counties who can't compete with local funding. And this has got to be addressed at the state level. There's no way for us to do it. We need your help. And the Republicans ought to help also. I know you know that.
Well, and Dr. Mbenga, didn't you say like North Carolina Central is graduating 16 students, right? I mean, Ms. Chavez, when you were at UNC working on the DREAM program, you can't find young people to go into education, even with scholarship. And I mean, that's our fundamental broken issue. I mean, and that's not who North Carolina is, as y'all know.
And in an exceptional children's role where you need a master's degree, where you may not get paid for that master's degree, just layering that on top of that.
Well, Matt sort of opened the vein for me with working with our colleagues. Because one of the notes I've written down, and this seems like a good time to share it, is I think what's critical is I think you all know this delegation has been responsive and we're doing everything we can. But continue to be in the minority is a challenge for us. And as Natalie mentioned, in the super minority, I don't think it's as dire as when we were down to 15.
Yeah.
Some of y'all remember what that was like, HB2 and earned income tax credit, and a few other things that just went by the way, that either came up or went by the wayside. But I think this is the time to continue to work through your associations, be that school board association, superintendent's association, and talk about the strength in numbers, because these rural school districts are having the same problem. And so they've got to speak up about this and talk about what the challenges are. Because I've got to guess it's a lot harder to find school bus drivers in Caswell County and Yancey County and Pasquotank County, and even more challenging. I remember when I represented Caswell County 6 or 8 years ago, they started a school year without having a Spanish teacher at the high school. Now, y'all think about that for a second. They went and found a retired French teacher who was willing to come back at age 75 and at least start the academic year, because she could get them through till they could find a Spanish teacher. And they did eventually, but I mean, they had to go above and beyond. They were teaching Spanish at the high school for the whole county. So so I know y'all know some of that stuff. But this is a challenge we have to address across the board, because if you talk to President Buxton at Durham Tech, he can't find math and science instructors either. So to the extent we can help be creative in that respect, like in the allied health sciences, a lot of what they're doing in the community colleges is reaching out to, say, a Duke or a UNC hospital and getting release time from staff. So if you all have got creative solutions for ways we can fill some of these jobs, particularly like EC, the math sciences, please let us know, because I think our colleagues are starting to hear this, but continue to press your school board association on that. I think it would be helpful to hear to get y'all's numbers, but let's aggregate those two. If we're running 150 vacancies in Durham, add Wakes in and add Oranges in and add Mex in, but add those rural counties too, because I bet as a percentage, a lot of the smaller counties, their percentage is higher as a percentage of their total workforce. What else next? But strength in numbers is going to be helpful, and getting the rural. Y'all know the reality of this is the urban areas are represented by the Democrats. Durham's probably the best example, but it's Wake and Meck and the same too. But where there is a Republican member, quite honestly, in an urban delegation, I think of Representative Bradford in Mecklenburg, or Representative Perret in Wake County, we need to use those openings with their individual delegations. Senator Berger now represents a piece of Guilford County. So, those counties who have a Republican in their delegation, particularly if it's in a leadership role like Berger, need to speak up and carry this flag into battle on the staffing question. So Matt, I'm taking your broader question down, drilling it down to that, for instance. But anyway, those are just some thoughts on staffing, but generally working with our folks with our colleagues in the majority.
And what I would say on the House side is there's a sort of a feeling that, especially as it relates to Leandro, that they don't want to be told what to do. And I don't know what the percentage of that is in their decision making, but that's definitely part of it. So a little bit of stubbornness from them, but also I think one of the things that you have on your agenda is opportunity scholarship just means privatization, right? And they're sort of looking at a way to feed those other beasts and look at teacher choice as much as possible, which bleeds the public school system. And we've been dealing with this for as long as we probably can remember. We don't know what to anticipate this session, because we know that there's some more sort of legal things moving, but that's on the top of the agenda to find out sort of where they are with that. One thing to add on to Mike's point is, or Senator Woodard's point, is there are also more Republicans in foreign Democratic areas in the state Senate in Eastern North Carolina. I think you picked up 2 Senate seats in Eastern North Carolina that formerly and generally have a high population of Black and brown students. And so they will be hearing from their counties that they cannot move forward without supplements, filling vacancies, bus drivers, all the things that we're dealing with. And so we do hope that there is some some opportunity there. And then one of the things too, because of that dynamic, teacher diversity, and that they don't necessarily have a great appreciation for that concept, but they do understand fundamentally that you know, it's good to have a teacher in the classroom that looks like the student that can relate. And so I know that the task force, the teacher diversity, the Drive Task Force met, and they are sort of boiling down what they believe are some doable items in this General Assembly, at least some that they can propose in the governor's budget and move forward. But I think, you know, to Mike's point, but just to add, I think even though we have shifted in the political dynamic, I do still think that there's some opportunity because of that. You can't hide from constituents. You can't hide from the people who have to elect you. And so I'm hopeful that we'll get a chance to not necessarily get all that we want, but get some things moving.
Oh, and Madam Chairwoman, just a quick addition on the Senate side, a big change will be the leadership of the Education Committee. In the Senate, we don't have multiple, we just have one big Education Committee. I would be highly shocked if Senator Mike Lee out of Wilmington was not appointed chair of that committee. So on the Senate side, he is who we'll be working with directly. Senator Ballard was double bunked, and so she will not be returning to the Senate. But there were some very specific issues. I actually was able to get some ground with her. But we will just have to navigate those waters, but it will look very different in the Senate because of that new leadership too. So that is something to keep an eye on the majority side.
I will follow up and say the investments in mental health, I do think we can move there. When we had the COVID session, there were lots more resources and attention to that. And I think even in the last session, you know, there was, you know, in a compromised budget, there was an opportunity to add, you know, a few more of everything that we needed, not a whole lot. But I think because the mental health crisis that's facing the state of North Carolina and the country with kids that are 14 to 24, that is top of mind for a lot of people. And so I do look forward to seeing all the agendas from state associations. I know it's something specifically that I'm going to talk about because kids do need this type of support. And I'm hoping that, again, with the state school association, I think we have the Principals Association, the School Boards Association, all those have to sort of come together. And so I don't know if we get all their agendas all the time, but if you do get them, please send them to us because we want to make sure that we can compile them and have those kinds of conversations.
I'm gonna go with Ms. Valladares and I'll come to you, Ms. Lewis.
I think the word integration is key in all of this. And I think we continue to struggle with that, especially in North Carolina. Integration as in looking at the demographic shifts that we've had. We have an immigrant community that is growing, continues to grow, and yet the opportunities that are available are still limited. And so I really appreciate our Senator Mike Woodard mentioning our colleagues and partners at Durham Tech, because they have been very instrumental in being able to work with immigrant communities. Folks bring in their transcripts and they're able to move their careers further. I mean, we need them. We cannot afford not to integrate, not to make pipelines and reinforce those pipelines. I've shared numerous times that even in our custodial staff, we have folks who have backgrounds in education in their home countries. You know, they're working for us already as custodians. One of them, I can tell you, at the Whitted School, puts chess pieces on her door. She was a chess champion. We don't know these things, right? A chess champion among the custodial staff and is teaching children at Whitted School, early childhood, right? Those kids who are learning all about chess and draws and is an artist and does exhibits on that. So shout out to the Whitted School. I recently participated and have been participating with the Deputy Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Cristina España, who was hired by the governor. She's been instrumental in hosting many events. She's always active. And we had a listening session and I was the moderator for that event where so many different government agencies are coming together. And the question is, how do we continue to integrate the immigrant community? How do we continue to keep in mind that we have talent, we have leverage with these communities that are here, that are a part of us, that are us? And yet, the opportunities continue to be limited. Sometimes we have, maybe they can't go to the universities and can't afford that tuition. But if we have we continue to invest in these community schools, community colleges, sorry, I love community schools, community colleges, and we continue to build those pipelines. And even with our high school students, there are already programs, pilots where students are ambassadors, students are already looking at careers. And I know that Dr. Mubenga, you've talked about many of these programs with our students being able to go into CTE, but even within CTE, what is really appealing to folks who want to continue to grow their talents in education with an outlook of serving this growing community that doesn't see representation in the school system, right? So I'd just love to see more talk of pipelines, more talk of DACA. DACA is very relevant to this conversation. We have, again, a pool of talented, some of the best folks that we have around. They are vetted, they go through a rigorous process, even to have DACA renewals. Though, if you know anything about DACA renewals, these are like some of the brightest, and just the rigorous process they go through and then they go through that certification all the time. And so we definitely have to continue to elevate the work of folks who are advocating for DACA students to be fully integrated. We need immigration reform. And while we wait for that, I do think that we have folks who can work, who are eligible to work, that they have permits. We have folks who are in our community who have green cards, who have residents who are eligible to work. We have lots of folks, and let's continue to work with the community colleges. Let's continue to work with the governor's advisory that is handling all the concerns of immigrant communities. And especially, I recommend meeting with Cristina España and just seeing some of the work that she's doing across the state in different areas.
Well, thank you for that. I will say that in the teacher diversity effort, that most certainly has come up. Not necessarily something that, again, we see our Republican colleagues being overly excited about, but the fight continues, right? It definitely does. And it definitely, we see that talent pool and we acknowledge that talent pool, especially in non-urban areas, funny enough. It is increasing there probably more than anything. The point I was going to make is that community colleges do well, have done well, and I think they will continue to do well under Republican control. As you can imagine, that's where their workforce, they're seeing a lot of, actually probably more of them are in the, those areas than they are in urban areas. And so they will continue to be funded pretty well. They've undergone a recent transition in their leadership, but not one that will be opposed to the work that the Republican majority want to do. And so they have done that. The two things I want to highlight that really have some potential for vacancies, going back to that topic, is that they did move forward with something like vets to teachers, sort of incentivizing former veterans and some that are sort of in non-active duty to teach. And so they incentivize people who are retirees to stay in North Carolina, but they're also trying to incentivize those to get into the classroom. And then one topic that we hope as a narrow piece is to see if we can get TA to teachers moving, like some incentives behind that. And so that is a tenet in a lot of areas. In some places, including like local foundations, have taken the initiative to go ahead and move forward with that on their own. But as a statewide practice, that's something that's definitely on the agenda, because we have, to your point, so many people who are already invested in the local community who are not moving. So it's not like someone who's coming from a Teach for America, or, no shade if anybody's from Teach for America. But it's not like someone that's coming who may move and not be invested in the community. And by and large, they are women of color. And so we really do have a huge opportunity there. And so I'm hoping that can get some movement, but that's on the agenda. Thank you for bringing that up.
I'm gonna go Ms. Lewis, Ms. Senator Woodard, and then we'll come back to some numbers.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to piggyback on what Representative Hawkins brought up regarding the investment in mental health. That is one of the items on our agenda, and I do think it's truly important that we have greater support for mental health needs for our students and our staff. And one of the things that Durham championed, I believe last budget, and we had local support to increase our funding for nurses, to have additional nurses, and we couldn't fill the positions. So I just want to leave the nugget. Not only do we need to meet the ratio by the School Counselors Association, what we need, the ratios within our school, but we also need to have a competitive budget, a competitive salary for those positions. Again, if we get the positions, but we don't have the funding or the competitive salary, they just remain open. So I just want to add that nugget to what you're sharing about the mental health support and needs. Also, I just echo the support that you all have already shared for our exceptional children's department, our students with special needs, knowing that we need to increase teacher support, creating incentives, creating a pipeline as well, and seeing what restrictions can be leveraged to really get the great talented staff that's out there for our students. So again, I support the another top priority is the teacher retention. And Representative Hawkins, you also brought up the Drive Task Force. So I'm looking forward to recommendations that you all are making and hoping get some edgeway along those lines. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up, another priority on my top three, I would say, is more on the practical side of things, such as a universal meal program. We're already offering free breakfast. What would it really support and help our children to learn better if they had free lunches? And we got an example of what that looked like when we were going through COVID. If there's any support around what universal meal programs can look like for the state of North Carolina, but particularly for Durham. And along with centering students, we need more flexibility around our calendar. We know that to close the opportunity gap, we know that to accelerate learning, we need additional instructional time, but we also need that flexibility to shape what's going to be best for our community. So, we've started things like Saturday Academy and have some flexibility there, but also need to be able to give our educators breaks. And again, all of that will work together to create a healthier work environment and support the mental health needs of our educators and students.
Yeah, I like the meals program, Javonia, because I tell you, y'all know I tutor 2 mornings a week at CC Spalding and the cafeteria staff there. They cook greens as good as my grandmama did. I just got to make sure y'all know that. When I go down the cafeteria line with my students 2 days a week and I see greens, I know I'm a happy camper. So I had a few, I have a kind of a grab bag of things, but tying on to the mental health for a minute. And I don't know a lot of the details. Maybe you all kept up with Cody Kinsley, our Secretary of DHHS, and Superintendent Truitt, I think announced yesterday their request of $5 million in the budget for mental health, which great, but that doesn't seem like that's nearly enough. So if y'all have looked at that, love some more details on what your analysis of that request from Secretary Kinsley and Superintendent Truitt was yesterday. But and they were all praising each other, working together. But my thought was 5 million just doesn't even, we could spend 5 million in Durham. So, so anyway, I'd love to hear more about that. And again, to your point, Javonia, I know we got a nursing shortage. Is there again some creative solutions we can use to find? The problem with nursing is that when you look like at traveling nurses who can make $100, $150 an hour, nurses aren't going to teach in the community college level. They're not going to be school level nurses, because if they've got that BSN and if they've got an MSN, they are going to command big salaries and they're going for those salaries. Is there a way to partner with our health systems to provide some release time or something like that? I know I serve on Chancellor Washington's advisory committee, and we're meeting next week, and that's going to be a topic that I want to raise with him to find out if there are ways that Duke's paying those. Of course, Duke's struggling too because of the traveling nurse programs, but is there a way some of these nurses can come in and provide some support? It's going to require some flexibility on credentialing, I think, and on work times and things like that. But I know that's a struggle to think about. I wanted to mention a couple of things and ask you all some questions. I think one thing that it will probably come up, I don't see it on the agendas here, but we can't anticipate it as something you all would like to happen. But I suspect we are going to see more legislation this time on curricula changes, parental choice, whatever euphemism you want for it. But the notion that critical race theory is taught in our schools, we know it's not. But I think you're going to see more legislation around that this time. The supermajority in the Senate and the near supermajority in the House, I think, means that any attempt by the governor to veto such legislation will just be brushed aside. So we want to stay in touch with you all as these bills come up. I have my 10-minute ranting floor speech from a couple years ago when that came up, and I will dust that bad boy off and throw it at them again if we need to. But I think that's going to be an issue we're going to face. So while we in Durham care about exposing our children to real history and real people, I'm not sure that's true everywhere else in the state. So I think we need to be prepared for that. I did have a couple of questions I'd love to hear from you all about. I think I know the answer to this question. Do y'all have some capital needs? And what can we do at the state level for that? I've heard some talk out of the governor's budget office that he, again, I think intends to propose a state bond for school capital needs. We have not had success getting that in the budget. But I think this is something I hope you all can rally around with your colleagues and the other LEAs to push for capital needs. So I'd love to hear some more about that from you all. If you're aware of any charter legislation that we need to be aware of as well. Again, I've heard some rumblings about that, but I'm just not sure what you all have heard about that. So I'd love to hear a couple of thoughts around some of those sort of grab bag things that I jotted down as my notes. So.
Dr. Mbenga.
All right, let me start with capital needs, then I'm going to toss it to Dr. Monk. We all know that we are fortunate in Durham. Our citizens here, they were able to support our bond. We are really grateful. But I just want to caution us, anytime we're pushing for something statewide, we do not need to exclude those urban districts. So anything we push statewide, it needs to be across the board based on ADM instead of excluding Durham, Wake, and other districts. Our capital needs, they're huge. Fortunately for us, we've been really trying to catch up, and our citizens, they were able to support our bond, but still we have close to $1 billion needs. And I'm just gonna give Dr. Monk opportunity just briefly to say what we need.
Dr. Monk, can you also, a little bit related, but a little different. I know we've had some conversations about needs from the Department of Transportation around some of our new building. And if you could just add that on to the end, that'd be great.
Certainly. And good morning and welcome everyone. The answer is yes. We certainly need capital improvement funds. As Dr. Mbenga mentioned, our voters did overwhelmingly pass a bond, $423 million. That only touches 7 schools. $423 million, 7 schools. Every year, our buildings get older. Our average age of our building is 45 years. And every year they get older. The equipment within those average age is 45. And we just built a new school, which brought it down tremendously. So, you know, when you're faced with those types of needs, over 6 million square feet that we're maintaining, 1,500 acres, the annual capital that we should be putting into our capital replacement is close to $15 million. And then you couple that with years and years of deferred maintenance, you get way behind the mark. And this is beyond just, you know, brick and mortar. This is where we send our children to learn, where we send our staff to work at. It's beyond now just being comfortable in the buildings with the heat and air. We're talking about building well buildings now, especially with COVID-19. There was a lot of lessons learned from COVID-19 that helps us with the flu virus. We know when students are in school, they're learning, their academic achievement is better. And when they're absent, it plummets. And having well buildings keeps our staff and our students in schools. So the capital needs are certainly great. They need to be annual. We can't wait for decades and then try to play catch up with these things. Hopefully we'll see some of our construction costs go down in the upcoming years as we move forward with the bond referendum. But right now we're looking at, $400, $450 a square feet to build our facilities, which is it's demoralizing at times, but we're fortunate that we have a community that says that we want to build new here. We want to renovate the existing facilities that you have because we want the best for our students and we want them learning in an environment that's 21st century. To Chair Umstead's point as it relates to DOT and others, and I also want to piggyback on bus drivers. I need like 70 bus drivers. If we can't get kids to school, learning will not be occurring, right? Part of our challenge as it relates to bus drivers is the time that it takes them to actually receive the license and be able to drive. If I was to hire someone right now, all right, what's the date? January the 5th, I probably wouldn't be able to put that person on the road until May. And that leaves me with one more month that we would have them. So those are the types of challenges that we're dealing with, and we need solutions from the state level to help us with that. And we recognize the challenges that DMV are facing with hiring people to go out and conduct some of these trainings. And we think that we can work together to figure out a way that we can expedite that, though, because we have drivers here that's been driving 20, 30 years. They are experienced drivers. They know what it takes to move our buses. And maybe that could be part of the solution, that we have in-house trainers and licensors that we can utilize. So lots of challenges, but it's also a great time to be a school district employee because every day we get to do something that others don't get to do. And that's educate and prepare our students for the future. The same kids today that's going to be taking care of us whenever we're a little grayer. I would. Some of us are already there, ain't that right, Mr. Woodard? I don't know. I'm there with you too, man. I'm there with you too.
And Dr. Monk, that's a great list of things that we need. And I'd encourage our delegation to talk to our brilliant board liaison, Nicole Smith, who actually went through and got her licensed and is driving buses on this. Yes. But I mean, she can tell you personally, about that process and how intense it is, but she's a rock star like most of our DPS folks, but yeah.
I'm gonna make sure, we're gonna kind of start wrapping this up, and I want to make sure folks who haven't had an opportunity to speak get one. So I'm gonna go to Representative Austin. I'll come over here to Representative Moray, Representative Jeffers. I'm sure we have given you an earful, but if there's anything you want to share, I want to make sure you have the opportunity.
Thank you. First, I appreciate the comments about the CDL training. I made a note earlier, and it's something we talked about a little bit last year about CDL training funds for DMV. So that's something I'm happy to circle back around to with the delegation and see what we can do there. The main thing I wanted to highlight, and I think I know the answer to this, but I wanted to ask, is in previous sessions, we've spent a lot of time on bills for workforce housing and teacher housing. And, I think we've been working locally to determine what your authority is to pursue that work here without, a legislative fix. And so I just wanted to confirm that that's whether or not that's something you'd like us to continue to work on in this legislative session, or if you feel like you have what you need to pursue that kind of housing work here.
County was supposed to be update us.
Yeah, we've been working with the county. There's a opportunity that the county can do something that can allow us to do that, and they have been open to that conversation. So that's where we are with that.
Really appreciate this morning. A lot's been said and talked about. I just have a few things that we haven't mentioned that is always on my mind. I know last time in Joe Bonio, we talked about it, the truancy issue. And especially after the pandemic, how many kids have we lost? Where are they? What can we do to get them back? A second issue that comes up that Jane Weddick from Duke has always asked about is homeschooling kids. We aren't tracking them. We have no standards. We have no reporting. How many kids have we lost through homeschooling? Where are they? Are they subject to any, risk because of that? And that's something I would like to look at. And anything we have of Durham for any statistics would be very helpful. I think a fact sheet would really help us, to say, these are our vacancies, these are what we're doing, a fact sheet from Durham that we could pull out, we could take to the Republican chair of education committees at any time. The budget work starts now. I heard Matt say, I wish you would push this for the budget. Let me just remind you all, if you didn't know, the budget started in the Senate last year. There was no amendment allowed. It came to the House, voted up, voted down, period. So to start with the budget, now is the time. We need to go almost on our knees to the chairman of the Education Committee, which is probably John Torbett, and say, let's start talking now. That's the reality. A priority that I've already heard Senator Berger and Speaker Moore, if we elect them, is the parental rights, bill again. And it's not critical race theory, but it's not teaching any K through third grader about sexual identity or orientation. That's going to be coming up, and I hope we can be ready. I know there was Durham Public Schools had a great statement against it, and we got to be ready for that. Things are going to probably start happening and happening fast. I am particularly interested in juvenile justice, the issue of the SROs, the flexibility that we need. We don't need SROs in kindergarten and first and second grade. What creative solution can we come up with? And very proud that last year we got 6, 7, 8-year-olds out of our juvenile justice system. And we are working to try to get, if an SRO is filing a petition to go to court, that a school administrator also sign off on. So it's not just a mini criminal court for juveniles. Those are just some of the other issues, and I really appreciate this opportunity to be with y'all. Thanks.
Well, thank you all. Though I'm the newest person and haven't had the chance to be at the state to be able to talk to the backstory, as many of the representatives and senators have today, know I am I've cut my teeth at the county level. And so I understand that, especially when it comes to the capital needs and the vacancies, and hearing this, and like it was said before, it's not much difference from the rural areas. In fact, it could be worse in some areas, especially I think with the capital needs. If your schools are average age of 45, I've got students, including one of our children that's in a school that is 70 years old. And so we understand that as well. Raised by a 7th grade English teacher, married to the director of our Head Start program. So you definitely have my ear. I would like to possibly meet with you, the superintendent, to just kind of get a better understanding of the school system, and also kind of to learn a little more about the technology needs. And obviously equitable access to broadband is a big issue for me, especially in the rural areas and the rural areas of Durham that I serve, to know how that impacts our students, as well as early childhood and what we could do there with that as well. And so thank you.
Ms. Chavez.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And this has been a great discussion. The only a couple other points, I guess, that I would raise that came out of this. One is just around our mental health needs and how I see that as connected to community violence. And it was on the news about New Year's Day in Durham, the shooting. I think shooting of multiple people. I just see keeping our kids connected to school and giving them the resources in school with sufficient teachers who can be mentors and support them and advocate them and for them and keep up with what they're going through. And then the mental health supports. This is really just a wider issue for our community. We're losing kids. We have lost kids, as Representative Morey said, with some kids have become more disconnected through the pandemic, and we want to keep our kids connected to our schools and supported and feeling like they belong. So that's the only point I would make there. I'm really interested in what we can do preventatively for our community to kind of curb the gun violence issue. And secondly, just wanted to say on the critical race conversation and around LGBTQ plus identities being kind of on the table. I that's something I'm certainly concerned about, and we are we have in our policy, and we believe as a district that we can validate our students' identities, whatever they are, in our classrooms. And so the only point I would make there is just that if we look at the students who are ranking lower academically, it is our Black students, Latinx, EC, ESL students, and low-income students. And so, there are obviously crossovers between those groups as well, but I'm really concerned with allowing those populations of students, especially, to excel in our schools and have the support they need. And some of that is really validating who they are and seeing it that is connected to their own intelligence and worth in the classroom. So that's just the other point that comes to mind for me. But thank you for the discussion.
I'm going to pass it to Dr. Mabinga, and then we'll close out.
All right, a couple points here. First, calendar. We know that there have been some district now that's even a larger district been able to attempt to break the law. And I would like for you just to keep eyes on that. At the end of this year, if that district is going to be permitted to continue with breaking the law, so we'd like to know. We also would love to be on the same calendar. So we'd like for you to be able to raise your voices there. If something is not fair for one district, that's across the state. My next point is about charter schools. It's around, it's growing, it's not gonna stop. I think Representative Harkins had an idea how to bring us around the table. I'm not speaking for the board, I'm speaking for myself. I will have to have those conversations with those groups and see how we can copy some models across the nation and be able to work together. So I'm still interested to see how we can bring some of those charter schools around the table. Those students, some of those charter schools, they K-8, eventually they come back to DPS at a high school, and some of them are far behind. So we'd like to be a part of that solution, and anything that we can do legislatively to help to have those relationships, I think that'll be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you all again for coming for this conversation, and I really appreciate the time. We've laid out a lot of issues here, and we'll continue to work with our association and move forward a legislative agenda, but also know that we are here and able and willing. So as different bills or other things come up, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And we are in the fight with you. We got to do this together for the students of Durham and for public education. Like, that's where I see this fight really about the state of public education in North Carolina. I grew up here, went to public school here in a time where we were held up for what we offered for students. And it's a little embarrassing where we are today. And so we've got to do the work together to make sure we have what we need for our students. Senator Woodard.
Yeah, let me just, on behalf of the delegation, thank you all. Y'all have heard me say this, and I don't say it just because I'm sitting here with you all, but I think the hardest elected job is a school board member. I often have said that, and I'll stand in the city council chamber or on the floor of the legislature and say that, because you all have the toughest job. You don't always control your money. You don't control much of your policy, and everybody thinks they know how to run the schools. So, and people care about their children. So thank you all, school board members. We didn't thank the staff, and I neglected to do that early on. So thank you to the senior staff and all the staff here. Dr. Mabinga, your office, for working with my office to schedule today's event. Thank you all for breakfast. We always count on y'all to have the best breakfast of our stakeholders. So you came through again this year, and we are grateful for that and for your time today. And Chair Umstead, to your point, you all know how to find us, and we know how to find you. So today just begins the dialogue for this long session. So you all please stay in touch with us. We're not a bashful group in this delegation. Y'all know that. You know us all. So, and I can speak for Ray Jeffers. He ain't bashful either. So when we have questions or concerns, or need information, we will be getting in touch with you all to help us with this. But thank you again. It's always a great dialogue that we get to have with the school board and with the senior administration. So thank you all for today.
Thanks, everyone.